Hey guys, it's welcome back to another league installment of the Acer Predator Training Room. In this video, I want to talk to you about the importance of and how to set your expectations in League. Setting expectations is important in League for three main reasons. Firstly, it helps you play better. Secondly, it helps you tilt less. And thirdly, it helps you know how to properly and more efficiently improve. And when I talk about setting your expectations, what I mean more specifically is better understanding your role, how you should be playing in your solo queue games, and then quite obviously setting expectations from that. So let's take a deeper look now at the functions of each role in the game. The top lane is probably one of the more varied roles in the game because you can play tanks or you can play more fighter style champions. If you're playing a tank, what your function is in that role is essentially just don't lose lane and look for opportunities to teleport to help your teammates out, and then as the game goes on you want to team fight effectively. But if you are one of those fighters or like a bruiser champion, there is a bit more emphasis on you to win that lane. So there should be a higher expectation of how exactly you would go about winning that lane, whether that comes down to mechanical plays or knowledge of wave manipulation, that kind of thing. These champions are often good at roaming too, so if you're like a Kled, for example, you want to come out of that top lane, make plays somewhere else. If you've got teleport and not that ignite, similar situation there as with the tanks. And if you're a split push champion, you want to know how to make that split push as effective as possible. Now I realize that because of the varied champion pool in that top lane, the function of your role will vary alongside it. But hopefully you get the idea that I'm trying to put across here. Your expectations should be forged around the points that I mentioned. So say you lose a game and you're trying to think about why you lost it to improve, all you need to worry about are the things that are relevant to you and your role within the game. And just to give you more of a specific example, let's say that your bot lane feeds their ass off and you lose the game because of that. If you don't have teleport, well, there's not really too much that you could have done to change that. If you did take the ignite, then the way you would win that game is by trying to win your top lane harder than the enemy bot won their lane. But if you do have the TP, you can take a look and be a bit more reflective and say, okay, how could I have used this TP to help my bot lane? Sometimes just knowing that things aren't always your fault can help you to not tilt as much. And it also means that you can more accurately analyze your games rather than just like blindly reacting to whatever you thought was the reason why you lost. Okay, so hopefully you get the gist of what I'm trying to say here. So let's move on to the next role, the jungle. The jungler's function in the game is to facilitate the team's win conditions. Sounds like a completely nonsense, buzzword, rubbish phrase, and that would be because it absolutely is. So let me get into the specifics of what I'm talking about. One of the things junglers want to do is to snowball and gank lanes that are easy to do so in. Whether that's your laners having good gank setup or the enemy laners being more vulnerable, whether that's going to a lane that's already winning and helping them win harder. It's also important for junglers to track the enemy jungler so that you have good information and knowledge of where they are so you can see what plays they might be making. This helps you to protect your laners, nullify the enemy jungler's impact on the game. Junglers also need to control the objectives. You don't want to be bleeding towers, dragons, heralds, left, right, and center. But most importantly, a jungler's role is not to win every single lane. This is a common misconception, mostly around laners, but also with junglers too. That whenever they have a game that went sour because one of their laners was just inting, then it must have been their fault somehow. Maybe there was something they could have done to stop it. As a jungler, if you have a laner that's just dying over and over and over again, it's not necessarily your fault or your problem. As a result, the focus of your expectations should be more around the points that I was making and how you can facilitate that, rather than thinking, oh my lordy, my teammate was feeding, I should have stopped that. Moving on to the mid lane, the functions within this role are to try to outplay and win that lane as best you can, obviously depending on the champion you're playing. You want to get good vision control around the mid lane, but also in that enemy jungle to gather mid priority where you can, essentially meaning that whatever play goes on around that mid lane, you can be the first one to react to it. Also important to roam to the side lanes to help them out where you can. And then obviously as the game goes on, how you play those team fights, because mid laners are usually pretty good carries in those situations. Or if you're playing more of an assassin style champion like the LeBlanc and the Zed, how you can enable those characters. So if your bot lane is feeding their buttocks off and you are playing a Talon, saying that mid lane who can roam around, maybe there is something that you can say to yourself, I should have been able to help that. However, if you're playing an Anivia who just wants to basically sit in their lane and scale into the late game, if those side lanes are feeding, it's not really your problem. So let's move on to the bot lane and your AD carries. The functions of your role are to try and win lane depending on the champion you're playing, to try and scale to your power spikes if you are not a champion that's particularly strong in lane, and then as the game goes on, to be able to carry in those team fights. Honestly, there's not too much to think about for the AD carry role. Your expectations should be, okay, could I have played better in the lane phase? Was I a bit too aggressive when my champion wasn't actually strong enough to justify that aggression? And was my positioning poor as the game went on and we got into those team fights? You know, that kind of thing. And lastly, if you're a support player, you want to try and help your AD carry do the stuff that he needs to do in lane, essentially the things that I mentioned before. You also have more of a focus on getting vision, roaming around into that mid lane where you can, and then in those team fights, you want to facilitate your carries to help them do what they do best. And I actually also think that there is a higher expectation on supports to shot call as well, because you're not having to worry too much about the CSing and the mechanical parts of League as much. So make the macro calls and try and guide your team as best you can. There is obviously an expectation on all players to be able to guide their team and make macro plays. But I think that if you are a support main, it's one of the better ways that you can contribute to victories. So get better at doing it if you're not already. So there you have it. Don't worry too much about everything that goes wrong in a game. Just focus on your things and you'll be much better off for it. Thanks a lot for watching the video, guys. I'm Foxdrop and I will see you in the next Acer Predator Training Room video.